So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Elin Thomasian, who is a Senior Vice President of Strategy, and David Wilkins, who is the Chief Marketing and Product Officer, both from Talent Europe, to talk about navigating the future of work via skills signals.
Do a shimmy when I got up here, but decided against it. Thank you for joining us here today. We are Talent Neuron, and we're going to walk you through how to navigate the future of work via skills signals. We all remember this movie, right? When I was thinking about this presentation, I had this in mind. It just came to me. If we don't stop and look at how skills are evolving, we really are going to miss the boat. And Ferris Bueller says it best. So I thought I'd start the presentation with this slide. The digital mandate is urgent as ever. I think we all know this, which is why we're here, which is why we do strategic workforce planning. Executives say 93% of the time we have to innovate with purpose. If we don't really understand the ROI. We don't really integrate it into our everyday tasks. 95% of executives say Gen AI is going to compel modernization. It's going to disrupt. It already is. It's moving very quickly, and we've got to keep up. However, 70% of transformation efforts fail. And I've been part of organizations where that's failed, and I've been part of organizations where it's been very successful. Why is that? Well, we tend to think it has a lot to do with understanding the evolution of skills and how companies are adopting them and integrating them into their capabilities. If you think about a machine learning engineer and how far it's come, as an example, I was having a conversation with a former colleague that I worked with 10 years ago, Stanford MD PhD, data guru. He said 10 years ago, it used to take 100 engineers to run and build an LLM model. Today, it takes 2. So you can imagine the role of the machine learning engineer, how quickly it has evolved over 10 years, but how quickly it has evolved even just over the last 2 years. And what the skills cluster and cloud looks like from 10 years ago, 2 years ago, and today. So when we look at the deep dive into the skills, we've got to look at job descriptions. Simple way for us all to understand what makes up a role. On the left is a very simple, basic machine learning engineer, probably a little timeless. This could have been from 10 years ago from the example I mentioned. The one on the right is a lot more recent. It's a lot more progressive, and it gives you perspective into what tools, knowledge areas, and skills are important today. What differentiates these job descriptions? Job descriptions are really, really important when you think about the 360 view that it provides. The candidates who judge you based on the job descriptions they see, who it attracts, what it describes about the progressiveness of your company, and how job aggregators and AI today scrape your job descriptions and draw insights into your capabilities of your company. A lot of judging going on with job descriptions, so be careful how you write them. If we look at the 2 job descriptions that I mentioned, the basic one on the left, some aspects that really differentiated the left and the right in this basic one is depth of knowledge. This one gives a very basic level of machine learning libraries that you need, proficiency in basic programming. The more progressive job description dives further in, gives you more advanced programming languages that you need. It talks about deep learning frameworks. It talks about mathematical concepts. So gives you a bit more perspective on the type of work you'll be doing using the tasks of this machine learning engineering job description. Experience with advanced technologies. As we know, technologies are moving quickly, and we need to keep up with them and make sure that they're reflective This one just says familiarity with cloud platforms. Well, the more advanced one really goes into naming the types of tools that are needed, the knowledge areas that are expected out of this role, and the hands-on experience in deploying some of the models that are very progressive in this day of machine learning engineering. Cutting edge, concepts are another important area. If I was a machine learning engineer coming out of a very great STEM program, I would want to look at job descriptions that tell me what cutting edge concepts I would be working with and deep diving and using the tools in the knowledge areas. That's what would attract me to go work in these types of organizations. And in today's market with scarce supply, job descriptions, your taxonomy of what it aligns to are super important because they do tell the story about your value proposition of why somebody would want to work at your company. And as you can see with the more advanced one, it goes a lot deeper into specific expertise in machine learning, knowledge areas, as well as familiarity with tools and tasks that they will be involved in and interesting projects that they're going to be working on. Educational background. While I'm not a huge proponent of needing educational background because I do think skills can be learned, as was mentioned by AJ, I do think in certain STEM degrees and fields, credentials really do matter, and educational background is a differentiator, depending on the context in which it's placed. In this first one, basic, it says, they need a bachelor's degree in computer science, engineering, or related field. And the more advanced one, a master's or PhD is desired as a requirement and focus on AI. Now, when somebody got the degree, where somebody got the degree, what they did with the degree matters greatly, and you'll figure that out in the interview process and in your assessment tools. But just the fact that you're saying you're preferring an advanced degree does make a difference in the type of candidate. So when I was mentioning the example with the former coworker, an MD, PhD in mechanical engineering might do something a little bit different when it comes to applying it to this job description than a simple degree. And I think that matters to you and the skills inventory that is going to make up the capabilities you're trying to build and how much that educational factor goes into it. So this is just a small example to show that skills matter more than ever, and they're quickly evolving. How do you future-proof your organization with all the disruption that's going to happen using skills? Well, first is you have to identify these high-priority digital skills, as we mentioned and demonstrated through the job description exercise. Then you think about, how do I attain those skills? Do I build it? Do I buy it? Or as the Cleveland Clinic showed us, how do you automate some of those tasks? And how do I build up my internal capabilities when I know I can't just simply and easily transferably go and buy that externally? Well, to go further into that, let's look at how we look at skill signals. When you look at the job description, it's reflective of you having interacted with your senior leaders to write those job descriptions, hopefully, to understand if your people leaders all are in consensus with what's needed in those job descriptions, and then comparing the job description of a ML engineer from one part of your organization to another, understanding the differences, the similarities, and what are the skills telling me about what I'm building in one part of the organization versus another? Where do I need to make sure that I'm advancing this certain skills, and where is it not as emphasized? And then how does that fit into my skills inventory or skills taxonomy? That's all part of your skills strategy in order to detect and monitor the skills signals that you need inside the organization. However, can't just leave it there. You're going to have a huge blind spot. And this is where we come in at Talent Neuron. We really help you gut check your skills inventory, your skills taxonomy with the external labor market. So what you might be doing and the way you might be writing your job description, you might think is very progressive. However, when you compare yourself to the market, to your talent competitors as well as your direct competitors, you might realize, wow, I'm really missing some important progressive skills that are coming out of certain very progressive academic programs or certain companies. And if I miss that, I'm not going to be able to move my digital mandate, which we talked about in the beginning. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Dave, who will walk you through Talent Neuron's skills evolution methodology.
Thanks, Elin. Appreciate it. You guys all hear me all right? Okay, fantastic. Before we get going, a quick show of hands. How many of you today are monitoring for external skill signals, like market-related skills, that kind of thing? Show of hands. Great. So maybe 10%. Of those of you that are doing that, how many of you are monitoring for skill evolution and seeing the progression of skills over time? Okay. One.
There's a shake over there.
Oh, sorry. Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. So as you think about the external marketplace, how many of you are monitoring the skills that your competitors are looking for, or alternately, what you would consider best-in-class organizations at the roles you're trying to fill? So a few more. Great. Excellent. So I view this as sort of the next horizon for where some of the skill stuff is going. So let me just acknowledge, I realize there's a lot of buzz about skills right now. A lot of that buzz is internally focused, right? Everybody and their brother has a skills taxonomy today. Everybody's skills taxonomy is the biggest and baddest, right? I have more skills than they have. My skills are better than their skills. Of course, nobody's validating anybody's skills, but we'll leave that aside. But this notion that like the internal side of it, I think we're becoming sort of rich with options and how we think about internal skills analysis. The external side, I think, represents a new frontier and how we look at, as Elin said, the way we compare to the overall market, what our competitors are doing, where we see best-in-class organizations evolving. So one of the things we've tried to do is actually get a handle on that. So for those of you that don't know, Talent Neuron, an external supplier of labor market data. So we have collecting somewhere between 1.3 and 3 million job posts per day in 40 different countries across all industries. Then we take all of that ingested demand data and we make sense of it. So we have our own machine learning and AI models that take that raw job post and then extract meaning from it. Part of the meaning that we extract from that are what skills appear in those job posts, right? And we normalize that against a pretty giant skills taxonomy of our own to sort of see what kind of skills are coming up, how are skills changing and evolving over time. So what you see here is we've basically built like a skills life cycle model that's centered around the notion of skill evolution. So when we detect something for the first time, we sort of categorize that as a new skill. As we see skills that start to move from new to increasing degree of frequency and the number of posts that they appear in, then we start to categorize those as emerging. From there, as they appear in more and more posts more frequently and with greater degree of consistency, it moves to growing. Eventually, it becomes core, and we expect to see it in most posts. And then over time, like all things, it might evolve or change or become something different, right? So some skills may deprecate, they might evolve to other skills, or in some cases, they might stop appearing in posts because they're just assumed, right? It's become so core, we don't even mention it anymore. It's just an expectation, right? So it's this notion that we can start to see how skills will change and evolve, right? And so as an example, when we look at that machine learning engineer, what you see on the left are emerging skills. So for those of you that don't know, Hugging Face is an actual technology. The first time I saw that, I went immediately to my team and I said, oh my God, there's some weird bug in the code. Like, I don't know what Hugging Face is. It's a real thing. And then there's, as you see on the left, what you see is a lot of focus on some new emerging tools, but also the new emerging concepts like prompt engineering and LangChain and things like that, right? And then on the right-hand side with growing skills, you see a lot of focus on what I would call domain or knowledge areas, generative AI, large language models, statistical language models, right? And so we can start to begin to see sort of patterns emerge in where the overall industry is moving across this job role and the way that the skills are changing and morphing within it to then give us some insight into what's happening, right? What gets even more interesting, though, is if you take this kind of insight and you layer against industries, right? Because not all industries move at the same pace, particularly when it comes to certain jobs, right? So if we look at this same role, a machine learning engineer, and we look at it against a banking and financial services sort of focus, I just called out a few skills here to sort of give some interesting insights, right? So one thing that's super interesting is on the far left, or far right from your perspective, financial services, declining. I have a supposition. My supposition is that initially when they started looking for machine learning engineers in financial services, someone said, as all hiring managers do, wouldn't it be ideal if they had machine learning and financial services? And then, of course, they found out what we would all find out, which is that's a purple unicorn. Good luck with that, right? Please just help me find someone with machine learning instead. I'll figure out how to give them some financial services expertise because that's our business. But what I really need uniquely is machine learning, right? So then you see something like PyTorch, which is a technology that's used for sort of managing some of the way you manage large language models and things like that. You see ChatGPT in the new space, and then this notion of cross-functional integration, which is really about, just like you might think it is, how do you start to integrate cross-functionally and make sure that whatever you're building in this arena is going to work in different functions within the business, right? So we'll keep a couple eyes on some of these, right? So let's go into a subsector within banking and financial services and look at fintech, right? So it's sort of interesting right out of the gate is that cross-functional integration is much further up the maturity curve, which suggests to me that in fintech, they're further along in this adoption of machine learning and AI kind of stuff, and they're now operationalizing it, and therefore cross-functional integration has become more important in that space. PyTorch is about the same. You see, they're not thinking about ChatGPT, they're thinking about conversational AI, which again suggests a higher level of maturity in the way they're moving the ball forward. And then we can go even further and let's look at what's happened with the gammas. So this is, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, the big tech companies. And you see immediately PyTorch is not emerging or growing or anything. It's core now. PyTorch is an expectation at this level. And they're now thinking about even big things like deep learning is now so far along that it's actually on the downslope. And really new emerging things like AI voice-enabled things, virtual reality suddenly make an emergence, right? So what this offers and affords is an opportunity to think about against where I'm at in my industry and my company. If I want to look at people like gamma companies, right? Where are they at in this journey? And if I'm aspiring to build similar capabilities and I'm looking to pattern myself after them through tools like ours and others that are in the marketplace, you can start to get like a perspective on what other organizations are doing, what they're looking for, and therefore get a little insight into kind of what their journey looks like and where they are on that journey, right? You could do this for competitors. How do I stack up there? Also super interesting. And use all this to start modeling this combination of skills and also use it as a factor in even task redesign, right? To what AJ and team were talking about. The other critical thing is thinking about what kind of skills are we talking about? Are we talking about knowledge areas? Are we talking about tools and technology? Are we talking about behavioral skills, right? Because that matters. So this is a map of the same kind of machine learning folk, but mapped by the number of times that a skill comes up. So across those millions of job posts I mentioned, what's the frequency with which a skill comes up? So PyTorch, Python, machine learning, TensorFlow, those are way far to the right in terms of number of times those appear. But when you then take a different lens and you say, yeah, but let's look at it from a percent growth perspective. What are the things that are growing the most in terms of things that are changing and how many more times on a growth perspective we're seeing certain skills mentioned? And obviously there, it's statistical language models, large language models, and of course, Gen AI, right? This has profound implications though on how you think about your build buy. Because just like in the healthcare example that Cleveland Clinic was talking about, you can't just build a nurse overnight. Well, you also just can't build somebody who's got large language model and Gen AI experience. That's like deep stuff you need to understand and know, right? So as you start to understand the growth and the evolution of the skills model and framework, and you bake that against the available supply, it starts to give you some insight into how you really begin to have the conversation around build versus buy using actual data, right? And so, we put a little framework together. It's pretty simple, but, there's sort of a buy if the external talent is available, you have a strong competitive EVP, and you have good location flexibility. build if it's proprietary skills or knowledge that are core to your business and ways that you should think about having unique IP, and also that you have adjacent skills that you can potentially build yourself. Or if the external supply availability is low, then that's another reason to go out and create a build strategy, right? So this is you'll have these slides too. But this is kind of a handy framework to how to think through this. But there's also sort of an interim thing of like, maybe I could buy enough and then build on top, right? And this notion of like, what's that skill mix? And are there certain things that I would really want to buy, like domain expertise and knowledge? And then could I layer on top some tool knowledge? Because that's a heck of a lot easier to impart, right? And it gives you sort of a framework to start thinking about some of this stuff. As we also think about this, though, you also want to think about like, who else am I competing with for this talent? So now I got my skills model correct. I know if I'm buying it. I know if I'm building it. Who else is trying to find the same talent? So this is a cloud engineer map for Bangalore, India, and like who's looking for cloud engineers. So this is a comparison of the kinds of employers that are looking for that kind of talent, and if it's growing or shrinking. I think the craziest thing about this, it's cloud engineer, and the dominant people hiring cloud engineers in Bangalore, India, are banks and consultancies. Which I don't know that I would have expected that. I would have thought it would have been tech companies, right? So your talent competition's coming from everywhere, which also means you got to really think through the EVP. Back to Ellen's point, you communicate a lot of stuff in your job post, right? Not just about what you're looking for skill-wise, but what kind of employer you are. And marrying those things together are important. So this is an interesting map, right? It starts to show what the relationship is in the category of overall culture and values. And you can see Deloitte's doubling down on meaningful work, leading edge work, and remote work with almost zero focus on diversity, whereas JP Morgan Chase and Oracle are almost exclusively focused on diversity, and then JP Morgan Chase coming in again with some leading edge focus, right? So we built an EVP taxonomy to sort of map all this stuff so you could start to see at a job post level like how you connect the dots. And our thought was that, if you can then marry that together with what you know about your skills of your competitors, the EVP of your competitors, you can start to really chart a course forward in figuring out how you outcompete for talent in a given location against the particular competitors that you're typically up against, right? So the notion is you can sort of put this stuff in a blender and then start to have a really good understanding competitively of the landscape that you're operating in, the evolution of that landscape. And as you start to use some of the internal tools vendors that give you internal views of your skills, then you can start to map your gaps, right? So I understand where I'm at from a skills perspective. I've done my task analysis. I know what skills go to those tasks. I can see what's evolving in the market. So if I'm going to fill my gaps, am I just filling my gaps to the today state? Or should I be filling my gap tomorrow state? Right? And that's an interesting sort of new frame to put on some of this. So the real question now is like, all right, great, I have all this. What do I do about it? Over to you, Elin.
Thanks. Back at it again. Identify future skills requirements. Sorry, just went a little too quick. There we go. You might think you're cool. You might think you're progressive until you look at the external market and you're like, ugh. Not as cool as progressive as I thought. I need to go back to the drawing board and really examine my skills inventory, really have a conversation with my senior leaders about the types of profiles we're attracting to the company, and have a conversation about, our EVP and what is attracting people to come work here, the meaningful work, the inclusive environment, the progressive projects that we're doing that are going to attract the right person to come and do these important cutting edge work at an organization that we're designing. So you really have to understand your skills and understand what your digital transformation is going to need. And then most importantly, as I mentioned, analyze your competitors. Where are you in line with your competitors? Where are your job descriptions when you look at that skills evolution curve in certain really critical roles that you have that are going to be driving your transformation? And where are the gaps, and where and how do we think about filling those gaps? What programs do we have if we're going to build it and develop it? And what does that look like?
I think the other key thing here, right, is really, as you think about all this, is considering talent availability, thinking about location flexibility. Does that role have to be done in a certain location? And the overall alignment to your strategy, right? And while we've mentioned several times sort of digital strategy, right, this is true for anything, right? This is true for healthcare. This is true for manufacturing. This is going to be true for retail. I think we're living in a state of exponential change when it comes to the role that technology is having in automating stuff, the degree to which companies are engaging in, task redesign or rethinking org structures and the way roles are going to even function, right? So I think thinking about this stuff holistically to then fuel your build versus buy strategy is really, really important. And that means thinking about team structure, workflow, role requirements, thinking about the skills that are required for that. And then thinking about internal talent marketplaces and skills adjacency. One of the things that I think is becoming increasingly important, given the difficulty of hiring in certain industries and certain kind of roles in certain parts of the world, like I think the days of trying to find a purple unicorn are done. That's very, very difficult anymore. We used to tell people like, stop looking for unicorns, start looking for horses, right? Now it's like, do you even need a horse? I mean, will a pony get you there, right? Could we throw a saddle on a pony? Maybe. I mean, if it's a big enough pony, can we grow a pony into a horse, right? Like we have to be even more creative, I think, than we've been historically. And so therefore thinking about skills adjacency and how we take people to that next role and how we hire into a smaller level of skill, maybe than we'd like, but with training programs on top. And having that kind of blended mind, I think, is really important as we go forward.
So taking that all into consideration, really looking internally when you've gut checked yourself against the external market and understanding how to step up your internal investments, building talent marketplaces that allow for the flow of skills and the rewarding of skills as people zigzag through the organization, understanding how to provide very clear pathways that help folks develop those skills as they're growing within the organization. As a former head of talent acquisition at multiple prominent Fortune 500 companies, building that talent marketplace where you compared your internal employees to the external market was very important for them to see themselves in the roles that they're in today, how that's progressing, but also be able to show them how their skills are evolving and how to develop them within your internal talent marketplace, where you reward them for taking on projects, for doing gig work, for expanding their horizons in the types of work that they're doing today. That's also a great retention tool. I won't be tempted to move to another organization if I feel like the company's investing in my development, making it visible for me to see where my skills are. Not always self-identifying, inferring the skills for me. So then I can actually sometimes be pleasantly surprised that from 3 projects that I've done, showing me what skills came out of me being able to do those, 3 projects that the company afforded me to do. And then knowing how to take those skills or cluster of skills, build them into a new role that can catapult me into a new career pathway. So these are all internal investments that you can make in your employee base to be able to lend them to ride that skills evolution and be able to take your digital transformation to new heights with the right people in the right place, in the right roles. So thank you for having us today. Hopefully that was very insightful. And
time for Q&A.
Yeah.
Please join me in thanking David and Elin for telling you on.